comparing some, because that's almost always what ends up happening with the data. Start doing like industry ranking or peer-to-peer analysis, or these types of companies are in our stock portfolio but these ones aren't, right? Like, how do you start? For example.
So I think we have probably another hours and hours of technical questions, but I was going to move also to AI and organization, right? And last time we met, and I'll give the floor actually to you, Isabella, to go into the more into the this transdisciplinary that we talked last time and
Yes.
see.
Oh, are you asking me, Manuel, or I wasn't
Yes,
sure?
yeah, no. I
Yeah,
was asking
what was the
you
question?
if
What was
last time we talked, Isabella, we were discussing how multidisciplinary efforts have to be done to both on the AI space and the sustainability space. So I was offering to you to continue the conversation and to Jen.
Oh,
So,
okay, thank
Jen,
you.
you,
Of
yeah.
course, love to hear what Jan is thinking regarding this. If you remember, I actually couldn't recall everything we were talking about, but I think this is a very good area to fit into the whole ESG. I was thinking when you were talking, I just want to share maybe as a few information because I'm here in Europe and I just feel like the whole vibe it's very different than American when it comes to sustainability, whether it's in the daily life uh, perspective or from the professional perspective. I was at a conference, a few conference recently about impact investing, sustainability, net zero, and I just want to echo what you were sharing. And mostly what people are talking about, there are three things. One is how to, and it's not about we don't have data, data are there, and how to analyze them. That's one struggle they have. So they're trying, and another thing is we're talking about ESG, sustainability, and all that, and the measurement and framework and everything, it's more or less around the environment and not too much about the social factors. So the social perspective has been brought up more lately, how to measure it, how to build framework. I also talked with a few interesting startups here, and they're trying to anchor into that direction. And there are also family office investors available, saying, oh, if you have anything like that available, talk to me. They're willing to invest because that's really a missing piece in the whole ESG report or an analytical process. And another thing is, uh, even when they have the data, when they analyzed it. And today I just spoke with a very interesting person. He worked for a company, and for confidentiality, I wouldn't name it. And he was telling me the company was growing interestingly. I was like, what do you mean very interestingly? Because they were doing analytics to begin with, and that's what they're doing for the clients. But however, the focus has transitioned from analyzing the data to consulting the clients on how to do with these reports and how to execute afterwards. So that became a main a job for them accidentally. They weren't prepared for that. So they're now actively hiring because that became a priority. So these three things has become a mainstream topics for everyone to talk and to discuss, and incorporating AI in the process. That's another whole conversation. And you've said it very well, Jan, how to make sure every steps along the way. So I just wanted to share this very quickly based on what you have just shared. I think it's definitely an ongoing conversation, and everyone's still learning about it. No one knows exactly what's ahead and exactly what to do.
That's right. And I think that's where everyone's just like, oh, and a big part of frustration with the sort of ESG space is it's flexing so much so quickly that it's just everyone's just like, I can't, it's just too many things coming too fast, which I empathize with that a lot. Interestingly, have you guys read Robert Eccles' pieces? He's a thought leader in the ESG space. And one thing I really like about his work is that he really looks for, okay, let's take this out of politics. It's a bipartisan issue. And he really tries to get sort of right and left leanings view of the space and to try to like bring sense to it. So again, this idea of if we trench in saying we can't do this or that because of political leanings, well, then we get stuck and nothing gets done. When at the end of the day, political leanings aside, when you look at the stakeholders are demanding more transparency regarding these types of data. Like, that's just it. Investors want to know investment risk, and they can't analyze that without these data anymore. And then if you do have socially responsible investing, say, or sustainability forward investing or whatever your use case, you want to know this data too, but that's only one use case of this data. Insurance companies and banks are two of the very biggest consumers of this type of data. Are you at risk, from environmental, social, governance perspective of XYZ? If you're an insurance company, for example, environmental risk because of climate change is a big thing, as we've heard about lots and lots, right? If you're a bank, are you up for this green loan? Do you fulfill the criteria, which often requires target setting and then showing you're on track of meeting targets that align with whatever that is? So that's an interesting way to think about it for sure, which I hope will help the US progress, because the legislation around it in the US is getting stuck a bit, but meanwhile, the world's kind of moving on with it. So the EU is definitely the most pragmatic and the most forward, but Singapore, China, Hong Kong, Asia Pacific's coming out with all their stuff. A lot of it is also, the other piece of that is the demand for international standardization, because companies don't want to create multiple disclosures. They want to do one disclosure and it fulfills criteria across the jurisdictions that they operate in. So that's another piece of that. I love what you said about the social piece, because I've heard a lot of that too. And a big tough point around that is sort of the more qualitative objective measure that often comes with a lot of the social issues. So tons of CO2 emitted is tons of CO2 emitted. It may be more or less difficult to estimate how much that is based on what type of company you are, but it can be done and it's fairly quantitative in nature. Whereas, if it's something humanitarian related, a lot of that often depends on jurisdiction and culture of what is acceptable. And one jurisdiction is absolutely not in another. It's even things like forced labor, for example. It's easy to see like horrible human forced labor versus absolutely consensual employment. Those, like so many things, those two extremes are easy, but then where do you draw the line in the middle of like just bad working condition versus forced labor? Like what are the definitive checklist of like deciding what's in and what's out there? So those are examples of where it should be done, absolutely, and must be done, but it's not quite as simple as like, oh, there goes another ton of CO2 that you've emitted. It's so it makes it tricky. And again, I think this is too why people are being more they recognize that supply chain needs a year or two to roll in, because where a lot of corporations have been either intentionally or unintentionally ignorant of what's going on in their supply chain, now they're looking to the supply chain and they're saying, okay, you need to tell us for real. And if you falsify data, then there's going to be repercussions, because I'm going to get sued potentially, which means you're going to get sued, or whatever happens there, right? So, I mean, it's interesting because it now is, if it's done correctly, it could be an enormous driving factor in improving a lot of conditions that have been a really hard nut to crack in how we produce goods. At least companies cannot claim ignorance anymore to what type of practices go into producing the goods that then they profit off of, right? And a lot of companies are taking action already. So, for example, Amazon, to be in Amazon's marketplace now, already they're saying, here's the list of data you need to provide us, and you're responsible for ensuring that's correct, and you're going to have to provide it every year. And if you don't want to do that, then sorry, you're not allowed to be selling on our platform. The end. And so, being a big company like Amazon, obviously they can do that. Again, it gets harder when you're sort of maybe a mid-sized company and don't have quite so much clout or options for providers to then start these types of conversations and start extracting these types of data. So, but yeah, I think it's a really interesting place, and sort of back to the AI question, how do we collect data around the S piece that is often a bit more subjective, a lot more qualitative, and kind of turn it into something that's more objectively measurable and something that AI can understand? Because there's often a lot of nuance around these things, right? How do you then get AI to understand and then start comparing because that's almost always what ends up happening with the data, start doing like industry ranking or peer-to-peer analysis, or these types of companies are in our stock portfolio but these ones aren't, right? Like, how do you start getting all this S data working to support that type of decision making? It's I find it a fascinating fascinating area, I really do.
Thank you, Jan. Maybe you could be part of this and you could, yeah, since this has become your part of your interest, this could be part of your scientific, I don't know, metrics or factors moving forward.
Yeah, I'm interested for sure to see. Right now, a lot of it is, do you have certain policies? Yes, no. I think the next step is to start having a more standardized way of evaluating goodness of policy. So not just do you have a policy, but how effective is it? How much do you reinforce that policy and make sure that it's being followed? So not even just having a policy is not enough. Like, how much impact is that policy having on your operations? I think that's the next step. But again, that's a big, difficult question to start putting in place. But yeah.
I'll
Absolutely.
pose a quick, really difficult question again, looking from inside out, being inside the companies. We talked last time about the disciplinary teams, how we address sustainability, and you mentioned the term of transdisciplinary teams. I'd like to, go back to you provided the definition, and maybe if we have an example this time of how this can be working in practice, because we mentioned it's data, it's social knowledge, it's economics, it's risk measurement. So all these things, all this knowledge that it's right now compartmentalized has to come together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. And that's where I've been hearing a lot of from a lot of different, basically all the areas in ESG, regardless of sort of who you're working for, is this whole move toward, we touched on it before, but de-siloing. So, sort of the first step there is getting information flowing more readily and data flowing more readily between the different pieces of an organization, right? Because if you're going to do good problem solving and innovation together, you need to be able to access the right data together. And a lot of systems right now have been built kind of just to address the department or problem space that you're looking at. So that's one. But then, of course, you also need the expertise to be able to know which questions to ask and which data you need to answer those questions. So that requires a lot of people who are knowledgeable in their silo, but also knowledgeable about each other's silos and areas of expertise so that you know where there are risks and opportunities around, right? And so we're hearing a lot of things like obviously training people more in the ESG, sustainability, climate change, social responsibility, like all these different spaces where they have expertise in those areas is something that has to happen. And I know you guys are actively involved in that. But training the sort of next generation that's coming in to have this as a specialty in and of itself. So right now, a lot of the time it's being created on the fly, and not a terrible thing, honestly, because everyone has their own background, and now they're thinking very critically about how can we work together and how can we start breaking silos down and learning enough about each other's areas of expertise where I can still answer questions and bring that lens to the table of this specific area of operations, but I know enough knowledge about your operations and yours and yours and yours that we can identify pitfalls, holes, and develop systems that are actually going to work to achieve the type of goals we want to achieve. And what are our goals in the first place? That's when you can't really answer unless you have that sort of bigger picture thinking. So a lot of companies now, amongst C-suite and the level below C-suite, are really forming teams, and their number one priority is really to start getting data moving around and learning about each other's spaces enough that they can then start doing some informed decision making as a team as to, what are our goals, what's material to us, what kind of data do we need to collect, how are we going to collect it, what do we start doing first, second, third, because you can't do it all. So all these different pieces. So it's fascinating. We are starting to see a lot of transdisciplinarity where truly new skill sets that are a blend of other skill sets are starting to organically emerge in this space out of necessity. So that's really interesting.
Talking about skill sets and sort of watching also the clock.
Yes.
Uh,
Time always
I
goes
would
fast.
exactly. I would like to again invite you back, but before going, I think we have a question about skill sets and the next generation. And again, I'll turn it back to Isabella.
Oh, thank you. Again, Jen, I will back up your theory with a real case story from my end about next generation. I think they're by nature open to multi-disciplinary approach, whether for, yeah, like today I literally just met, she's like a year younger than me, and to her this is very beneficial to her, and she's very open to, and she felt much secured once she was traditionally she was in traditional architecture profession, and then she learned machine learning, and I think she learned something else as well. And she felt after that she has that secured feeling that she can see and understand much better, and also she can explore much further with the career options and everything. It's just very beneficiary to her. So she see this as a huge opportunity versus such a pressure. I need to get out of where my expertise is. And that's just amazing to me because I just see this. There are a group of people, they're just by nature very open to this approach versus I just want to focus on my own expertise. So I think it's a shift.
Yeah,
And
I agree. And I think it's partially technology driven, right? So, and again, this is just me, Jen, sort of my opinion. I can't reference any research that points to this, though hopefully there's some out there. I might go look now, I'm curious. But that, when you look at how a lot of disciplines have been trained prior to the internet, prior to computers, you did have to become an expert in an area because there was a lot of memorization you had to do so that when you were out there operating in the field, you had it all in your head, because if it's not in your head, it's not there. Or, you're lugging around books to like then reference, or, but even knowing which book to reach for, right, is a specific domain specific thing. So if you came across a problem where you're like, I'm not sure, but I know exactly the book that has some of this answer or will start us down the path, right? You need a domain expert to do that. Now with the internet, AI, with, it's the human, all knowledge of humanity is in one spot, more or less, right? So that means being able to understand what information is needed, being able to understand how good the information you're looking at is, being able to understand how does information relate to the problem I'm trying to solve. That kind of decision making now is far more important. And yes, you still need domain expertise to be able to answer those questions with respect to different domains. But as the problem spaces become more complex, you need to be able to do that from several different lenses and be able to crosstalk to other disciplines to understand, do we have the whole problem getting solved? Which, I mean, obviously that's always been a thing too, but I think you're right. I think there's a lot more domain creep, if you will, and people who have interests in multiple areas. And that's something that is embraced a lot more. And it's a lot easier to gain expertise in multiple different domains. But yeah, that's a really cool example you gave.
And you also brought up a great point why this has become a paradigm shift because of the technology. It wasn't happening before because we have very limited access to everything and we have to count our human memories. So that's a great point. I just want to emphasize that. So based on this, all this cross-disciplinary in the next generation, what's your advice? So I know you gave some advice last time already, but let's cross-check, see if you're gonna give the same one or you have something else.
I don't know. When it comes to advice
I
with
forgot.
with this, I'm like, I can't remember what I said last time.
I
I hope it was good. um, I think
authentic our audience. You see, we don't do any pre-arrangement.
no, and
Let's see.
yeah, they're definitely not. I'll have to look now to see too what I said last time. I'm curious, but I'd say that the piece of advice, frankly, I think the biggest danger in this area that we all have to be so cognizant of is it's tempting to just try to move ahead too fast without doing enough careful fact checking and thinking about whether the data we're using are correct. For example, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? So, the fallacy of having all this knowledge at our fingertips is sometimes we can step outside our expertise too much, where we start thinking we know what's going on when we actually don't. And so I think that's the caution. Is it's a very powerful tool, but we need to be very judicious and thoughtful when we employ it. Otherwise it can, and I know we've heard this messaging over and over, but it can have unintended consequences which may actually achieve the opposite of what we were hoping to do. And we see lots of examples of that happening in AI, where people or companies set out with a good goal in mind or good intentions in mind, and then it blows up in a way that's not so good. So, and that will happen, of course. but being able to recognize it's happening, I think that's going to be tricky because, again, there are like the obvious examples where it blows up spectacularly, and there's lots of examples where it's working well. But those middle cases of where it's not working quite like we thought, and even detecting that it's not quite working like you thought, like that's the harder space where we're going to have to be really thoughtful about that kind of in between area.
Wonderful. What about for younger generations, the next generations, graduates, students?
I think, be brave. Be brave, but be honest too about limitations, and be curious, but also be thoughtful about impact. And I know a lot of I think the generation coming up doesn't get enough credit for that. So yeah, keep proving the other generations wrong that it's not all about speed and simplicity and ease and all those things. But this could harken back, frankly, to much more of a Renaissance mentality where we look to be the best we can in many different domains all together and all at once, instead of just I'm here domain. So
Thank you. Thank you, Jan, for everything. Noel, anything before we wrap it up?
Well, very quickly, 2 points. You're pointing out to polymath, to generation of Renaissance. Well, they were mostly men. I don't think we recorded many Renaissance women. Unfortunately, I'm sure they were. So thank you for that. And I'll leave you with my image about how AI operates. It's a librarian and has access to, let's say, all the books in the world. Ask the wrong question and you get the wrong book. Ask for the wrong paragraph and you get the wrong paragraph, because the books contain everything from science to arts to innuendo. And AI doesn't know what's the difference. It's the librarian.
yeah.
It's a serve. It will serve you whatever you ask for.
Yeah. You got to actually read the book to make sure it's the one you wanted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But no, thank you very much. I really enjoyed sitting back and listening to your dialogue and Isabella's dialogue. I'm sure we want you back. It's a pleasure to have you, Jen, again.
Oh, well, thank you. It's always a pleasure too. I always enjoy our chat. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Manuel. Thanks to our audience for tuning in. Make sure you join us every week for a new episode of AKFI's Actionable ESG Talks series, where you can gain new perspective on how to mitigate risk and create value by integrating ESG and digital transformation. Until next week, goodbye for now. Bye, Jan. Bye, Manuel.
Bye, Isabella.